Hey everyone, and welcome to our first episode of JRPG July 2016. I'm Kados, and it is great to be back. Final Fantasy 9 has somewhat recently been released on smartphones, as well as on Steam, so I thought it would be the perfect time to look back at this game and how it was inspired by the works of Shakespeare and theatre in general. Hironobu Sakaguchi, aka the guy that created Final Fantasy, says Final Fantasy 9 is his favourite and describes it as the closest to his ideal vision of what a Final Fantasy game should be. Personally, I think Final Fantasy 9 is perhaps the best designed out of the lot. It is a fun cast, great minigames and side quests, and is an enjoyable adventure. That's not to say it has its faults, namely Tetramaster being garbage compared to Triple Triad and the ending. Now, the Final Fantasy series has a wealth of influences and references to many other things, ranging from ancient mythological deities to even Star Wars and Star Trek, and of course the games tend to give nods and winks to each other in the series. Final Fantasy 9 is no exception, and is perhaps the most filled with all these small and larger references, from the names of characters and places, to recurring enemies, to even story elements. Final Fantasy 9 is essentially a tribute to its own series up to this point. However, one thing that is quite apparent is that Final Fantasy 9 is full of theatre references and allusions, in particular to Shakespeare, that influence many design elements within the game. So, just in case you don't know who Shakespeare is, he's the dude who about 400 years ago wrote a lot of plays about kings, prophecies, betrayal, fantasy, etc. that still heavily influence movies, TV shows and books to this day. He's heavily regarded as being perhaps the best writer ever. Yes, even better than the modern literary geniuses of E.L. James and Kanye West. You might remember reading some of his stuff in high school, you know, Romeo and Juliet, Macbeth and Hamlet, to just name a few. So let's proceed with how this guy, who's been dead for centuries, has influenced a Japanese game about a guy with a tail kidnapping a princess. That is Final Fantasy 9. Let's take a quick look at the start of the game where you control Zidane, and yes, that's how I'm going to pronounce it, who you were first introduced to him climbing down a ladder and entering into a very dark room. Now, pay close attention. He lights up a match which gives off a light around so you can actually see. Quite strange really, but perhaps this is just another allusion to a lighting technique used in theatre, known as a spotlight. Yeah, undoubtedly you've probably heard of it. Shortly after this, Zidane and crew do a warm-up fight. Game design wise, this is very easy and simply meant to introduce us to the mechanics without lengthy explanation. However, this could potentially serve as a rehearsal per se for a scene which will occur during the actual play. And lastly, Baku and crew explain the upcoming plans to kidnap Princess Garnet. This is basically an information drop to get the player, or audience, up to speed quickly by creating some exposition by essentially explaining the initial plot and opening act and how it should go. Keyword, should. And of course, in true Shakespearean fashion, nothing seems to go to plan. Now let's discuss some theatrical name inspirations, namely the cast of the Tantalus Theatre Troupe. Characters Marcus as Cinna could potentially be named after characters from Shakespeare's Julius Caesar. Puck, who Vivi meets early on, could also be potentially named after a character in Shakespeare's A Midsummer Night's Dream. The play, I Want to Be Your Canary, is written by Lord Avon in the game. In case you didn't know, Shakespeare was also known as the Bard of Avon. The play itself also shares a few parallels with King Lear and Romeo and Juliet, both plays written by Shakespeare. Wow, sure is a lot of Shakespeare, eh? Now, some people say this is where the references stop, and that the theatre influences are only during the opening act. After all, these are mostly names of characters and such, and well, as mentioned earlier, each Final Fantasy game is filled with references to culture, so by itself this is nothing special. However, there are still some theatre and Shakespearean references and allusions that occur after the opening act. Fast forwarding a little and avoiding major spoilers, we see that the start of the second disc begins with two guards bantering, quite possibly a homage to Shakespeare's Hamlet. During the third disc, a love letter is written which in a similar fashion to Shakespeare's Taming of the Shrew gets misplaced and picked up by different characters who interpret it to be from different other characters. Pure light-hearted fun and confusion. This whole hijinks and comedic segment helps to provide a distinct separation between when the game is trying to be philosophical, emotional and epic, and when it is trying to be light-hearted and, dare I say, enjoyable. A lot of Shakespeare's plays are written in this fashion, with the juxtaposing of serious with comedic to keep the whole performance entertaining. Moving away from particular scenes in Final Fantasy 9, it's time we go a bit further behind the curtain. Final Fantasy IX predominantly takes place on planet Gaia, which is obviously not the same as Earth. However, it shares basically the same calendar as we use, the Gregorian calendar. So the game takes place in the year 1800. Now, if we have a look at similar trends in our world in regard to European theatre, you may know something a bit interesting. During the 19th century, there was the rise of melodrama in theatre. Melodrama is defined as a sensational dramatic piece with exaggerated stereotypical characters and exciting events intended to appeal to the emotions. Let's focus on discussing exaggerated characters. Most of the characters in Final Fantasy IX are very exaggerated in both their appearances and their mannerisms. The main protagonists have very distinct features. We have Zidane the Thief, Garnet the White Mage / Summoner, Vivi the Black Mage, and Steiner the Knight. In the Final Fantasy series, these are regarded as stereotypical classes or jobs and hark back to the first Final Fantasy games. However, it is a bit strange that the single player games leading up to Final Fantasy IX and the ones after it shift away from such stereotypical classic Final Fantasy character design. At least on a visual level, these characters are very stereotypical, and if Final Fantasy IX were to be acted out in a traditional theatre setting, the characters and their roles would be quite distinct and recognisable. Even other characters, such as Queen Brahne and Baku, seem to be very large and have a sort of theatrical presence. So when it comes to stereotypical characters, let's give a big tick. Regarding the rest of the description of melodramas, with exciting events, appealing to the emotions and being a sensational piece, is a tick for all of these. I'm glossing over these because I'm trying to keep the analysis as spoiler free as best as possible. Now, these last 3 points are true for most Final Fantasy games, to some degree, and is an inherent part of what makes a Final Fantasy game great. So it's nothing too special. However, I want to focus on the key point of stereotypical character designs used in Final Fantasy IX. Further reiterating this point, we have several characters acting out as Shakespearean fools. Steiner, at least initially, is kind of the butt of jokes, such as when he appears on stage, he is clueless to what is happening. He doesn't realise there is a massive bomb behind him during an encounter, and later, while swinging on a rope to try and save Princess Garnet, he crashes into a building. Other such examples include the actual jesters, Zorn and Thorn, who seem to be in rhythm but slightly off sync in what they say and do, and are just a little bit silly. In the Final Fantasy universe, there have been plenty of weird and wacky characters. However, these two in particular are a bit different and unique and help with the comedic moments and pacing. So far, we've seen how Shakespeare and theatre have influenced Final Fantasy IX with naming, battle events, scenes and character design, but let's move on to perhaps the most convincing argument, the ATE. ATE stands for Active Time Event, because what's a FF game without some good old acronyms? Now, in previous games and future games in the series, we see the events occur through the eyes of the protagonists, or sometimes a temporary main character. However, in Final Fantasy IX, we see these constant shifts of different events occurring at the same time. The ATE allows us to see events unfolding around the world that may not necessarily be occurring to the main protagonists at the time, or even any of the characters we regularly control. Interestingly, this gives information to us, the player, or shall I again say the audience, that our protagonists would not actually know. A similar thing to this is quite common in theatre, where scene changes would occur quickly, or sometimes events would be running parallel on stage, and the focus changes from one to the other, usually indicated by a spotlight change. Yes, we have come full circle. Personally, I really liked these ATEs from a design point, and it's probably what led me to even begin to delve further into analysing Final Fantasy IX. Firstly, except for a few ATEs, these are mostly optional, so as a player, you're actually given some control if you wish to view them. This makes it nice if you simply want to rush through the main story as quickly as possible, while also catering for those that prefer to experience as much of the game as they can. Secondly, these are very useful in some pacing elements. In other Final Fantasy games, there's always that part of the game that just feels a bit too drawn out. Well, these can help provide a distraction by breaking up those drawn out moments. It's a real shame that we don't have this in other Final Fantasy games. Although I should mention that Star Ocean with its personal interactions and the Tales series with its skits are quite similar. Well, Final Fantasy IX isn't the only game that draws inspiration from theatre. The most obvious one to most people would be Super Mario Bros. 3. Not to disrespect Super Mario Bros. 3, but the theatre theme only really serves as a visual element, as well as perhaps suggesting that Mario and crew are simply all actors. It doesn't really bring in mechanics, character design or story elements like the ones present in Final Fantasy IX. During my research, I also found that Shakespeare would often use the literary device of using a play within a play, as seen in such works as A Midsummer Night's Dream and Hamlet. Wait a second, maybe, just maybe, Final Fantasy IX is really just all one big play. But hey, that's just a theory. A game. Stop. Sorry guys. Everyone has used that joke. Let's just wrap this up, okay? But hey, Pat, I know you love theatre and you enjoy Final Fantasy, so could this potentially be an episode? There are a few loose ends that I haven't even been able to fully explore, such as are the animal characters an allusion to the frequent animal imagery in A Midsummer Night's Dream, or simply just because? Or perhaps what Final Fantasy IX takes from other theatre influences, such as Quina's dance resembling that of traditional Japanese kabuki theatre? I invite you to continue the conversation down in the comments section, and let's all explore this game a bit further together. Anyway, finishing up, Final Fantasy IX is an amazing game that I highly recommend, and part of what I think contributed to it being a coherent and unique experience are the elements it drew upon from Shakespeare and theatre in general. Thanks a lot for continuing to support me, and in the next episode of JRPG July, I'll be discussing Dragon Quest Heroes, which, yes, I know isn't technically a JRPG, but just hear me out, okay? To ensure you don't miss out, make sure you're subscribed, or you can always check out some of last year's JRPG July videos with annotations on screen right now. Thanks for watching, and I'm Kados, exiting stage left.